So back to this now. We are marking 9 years since the Marikana Massacre. 34 striking miners were gunned down by police on the 16th of August. That was in 2012. The number of people killed and the description of the events often changes depending on who is telling that story. We discuss politicized commemoration versus a common approach to dealing with this dark chapter in South Africa. I'm joined now by historian Noor Nieftagodien. Professor Nieftagodien, thank you for joining me. In a moment, I'll start our conversation, but I wanted our viewers to just take a listen to something you raised yesterday in that speech that you delivered in the commemoration, which I thought was particularly impactful. Take a listen to what Prof. Noor Nieftagodien had to say during the commemorations yesterday.
We do need, at the most basic human level, a very clear, unambiguous apology, not only from the President, Cyril Ramaphosa, but also from the mining company and the ruling party. But for me, it's always been important that when they do apologize, that they call what happened on the 16th of August 2012 by its name, because they refuse to do so. They refuse to acknowledge that what happened there was a massacre. They use all sorts of words to get around it, and we have to insist that this is called by its real name, the Massacre of Marikana. For years now, AMCU and the families have demanded that August the 16th should be called a national public holiday. And we do want a public holiday because we want to remember the massacre. We want to remember all the 44 people who died around the time of the dispute.
Professor Noor Nieftagodien, thank you for your time. I asked for you specifically just to address this issue because it disturbed me that it would seem to me at least, and this is my view, that there isn't a proper reckoning with what happened in Marikana. We decry the fact that, the criminal trials are moving at snail's pace, 9 people charged, and actually 6 of those going on trial at the moment. The civil procedures are on the go, and Dumisan Sebeza was telling us about that. But it would seem to me that from a national memory perspective, we don't seem to want to take on board that this actually happened in a democratic dispensation, and somehow it would seem to me some among us are hoping that this will go away and eventually become a distant memory. Do you share my reservations and concerns? And perhaps you can share your own reading of how we are dealing with this as an event that should be recorded properly within democratic South Africa.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tulasiz. I agree with you completely. I think that there is a kind of underlying desire, probably driven by political considerations, to forget. And that is deeply problematic because, as you've said, the Marikana Massacre of 2012 was by far the most traumatic event that occurred in the democratic era. There have been many others, like Esidimeni, what happened a month ago in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. So there are all these traumatic events. And what we do as a country, driven by the political elite, and in the case of Marikana, also the economic elite, is this kind of desire to move on, to try and inculcate amnesia in society. And I would suggest that one of the underlying reasons, and possibly the primary reason behind this desire to kind of inculcate amnesia, is to avoid dealing with the real substantive issues. Why did Marikana happen? And as you suggested, and in your interview with Advocate Dumisan Sebeza, why is it that we still don't have justice for the victims of Marikana? The families of the 44 people who were killed, but also the scores of people who were injured the 200 workers who were unlawfully arrested. So there's a whole kind of package of issues there that we've not dealt with. And I think that is the primary reason that those who hold power, and perhaps more broadly society, don't want to confront realities, because when we confront those realities, we have to ask, as people have done, very hard questions. And getting to the answers, I think, is really unpalatable, because it will expose the underlying frailties, the problems in our society, which we try to gloss over all the time and not pause and deal with substantively.
Yeah. So let's talk, Prof, about President Cyril Ramaphosa directly. His, perhaps our reading of his reckoning with this particular chapter, because he was a player within this particular context of Marikana, having been a non-executive director at Lonmin and the communications that happened that we all know about. But in the end, the Marikana Commission, the Falam Commission, coming to the conclusion that he can't be held responsible for what happened in Marikana. Fast forward, he's the leader of the country at the moment, in charge, the quintessential commander-in-chief, to quote from the judgment of the Constitutional Court. What's your sense of his own reckoning with it? And I'll tell you the context in which I ask this. The times that he's been asked about this, there was a point where he answered that he had hoped that the late Winnie Madikizela Mandela would accompany him to Marikana for a proper engagement. And I think, if I recall correctly, he then quipped that perhaps even Julius Malema would be willing to go with him to Marikana. Why should the president be accompanied by people to Marikana? Is it not possible to have emissaries and various people doing the groundwork for him to actually reach out to the communities in Marikana and to the families of the victims, such that he emerges as the reconciler that he has been at significant moments of our history?
Again, Thulasizwe, I agree with you completely. You know, President Ramaphosa made this comment about being accompanied by Julius at the funeral of the late Winnie Mandela. And of course, he explained that the late icon Winnie Mandela had undertaken to accompany him to meet the widows. The fact that he hasn't since then, you know, met the widows and other family members of those who were killed and maimed, you know, during the massacre, and seems to, based on his speech at the funeral, you know, hoping that Julius Malema would accompany. I think this is a cop-out, I'm afraid. I think there's no other way of putting it. I think the president has a responsibility, not only because of his role, notwithstanding the finding of the Farlam Commission. You know, the reality is that President Cyril Ramaphosa, who was on the board of Lonmin, did play a role. Now, the Farlam Commission found, as he said, that he could not be held directly responsible and liable for the killing that took place. So let's assume that is, you know, the position that we have to accept. But you know, he has to account. And the widows want justice. You know, it would be symbolically so powerful if the president of this country, between now, the 9th anniversary and the 10th anniversary, took the time to meet those widows, right? And say whatever he wants to say to them. We can't tell him what he must say. The widows have to say what they want him to say. We, as the rest of society, I think, should step back. But we need to put the pressure on him to meet the widows, because he is the president of the country. He is the leader of the ruling party. And even if he did not send that email urging concomitant action against the striking workers, as a leader of the ANC, now the president of the country, it is his responsibility to take a leading role to deal with the trauma that continues to exist in and around Marikana. And
Prof, I'm completely out of time, but I do want you to re-emphasize that point around, you know, one of the things about that copy outside Nkaning informal settlement in Vonnerkop is that, you know, in a way it has served as a monument without, you know, all the markings and a big unveiling event taking place. When you look at that copy, we all remember what happened there. So in a way that serves as a monument. How important, though, is it that there should be a national kind of area, center of remembering this event and the traumas that are associated with it? How important is it, as well as the point you were making around declaring it a public holiday? Would it cost us anything if we did that?
Yeah, no. So, you know, very quickly, I'd say that we do need some kind of memorial, but we have to be very careful not to make the mistakes. You know, we can have another conversation about this another time, of the various kind of memorial sites that have been created, you know, to remember, to mourn the victims of apartheid. There have been many problems with that. I would say that the most important issue is that if we think about a place to memorialize the massacre of Marikana, that the people who were directly involved, the mine workers, the widows, the families, should be at the center of a process that tries to create some kind of memorialization. If it is only the government or the company, etc., that tries to memorialize on their own terms, it would be a fundamental mistake. Secondly, you know, I think it's a good idea to have a campaign around declaring, you know, August the 16th as a public holiday. But I think that we need to think about what that public holiday should mean. What would be its symbolic importance? And for that, we need a national discussion. I made some points in my speech yesterday about what I think such a holiday might mean in our country. And for me, it is about remembering not only Marikana, it could center around Marikana, but it needs to more broadly kind of think about the devastating consequences of mining in this country and in the Southern African region over 150 years, and the continued ecological disaster that comes out of mining as we speak today.
Right. Prof, thank you so much for your time. And Professor Noor Nieftagodien, the historian. Unfortunately for you and I, Prof, is that you and I seem to be on the same page, and that's hardly how dialogue works in the country. So you and I seem to be on the same page on these issues, and I'd gladly appreciate it if the team could suggest names, perhaps, that could point out where Professor Noor Nieftagodien and myself are going wrong, where we are reading the situation completely wrong, a counter view. I would really bring that to you. I would appreciate to hear a counter view on the issues that we've raised in the last few minutes.